That was the first thing Sarah noticed when the moving truck finally rumbled away, leaving her standing alone on the cracked concrete walkway. Not the cheerful pitter-patter of a spring shower, but the relentless, gray drumming of late October rain in upstate New York. It soaked through the shoulders of her worn denim jacket, plastered stray strands of dark hair to her temples, and turned the overgrown lawn of the little bungalow into a soggy, yellowed mess. It matched the hollow feeling inside her chest, a feeling that hadn't truly eased since the divorce papers were signed 6 months ago. The house, her house now, a concept that still felt alien and slightly terrifying, seemed to hunch under the weight of the weather. It was small, older than she'd have preferred, tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street that felt miles from the bustle of her old city life. The realtor had called it charming and full of potential. Sarah, standing in the damp twilight, saw peeling paint the color of weak tea, sagging gutters overflowing, and windows that looked like tired, hooded eyes. Potential felt like a heavy burden just then. Potential meant work. Potential meant commitment. Potential meant staying put when every instinct screamed to keep running. She fumbled with the unfamiliar key, the cold metal biting into her skin. The lock resisted, sticky with age or disuse, before finally yielding with a groan. The door swung inward, releasing a sigh of stale air, dust motes dancing in the weak light filtering through the grimy front window. It smelled empty, like old wood, forgotten corners, and the faint, lingering ghost of someone else's life, pipe smoke, maybe, or mothballs. The scent of absence. Boxes, hastily labeled in thick black marker, kitchen, bedroom, books, misc, formed precarious towers in the small living room. Her few pieces of furniture looked lost and awkward in the unfamiliar space. The silence was profound, broken only by the drumming rain on the roof and the occasional gurgle from the ancient radiator in the corner. Sarah dropped her duffel bag by the door, the thud echoing strangely loud. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the doorframe, closing her eyes. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was bone-deep, settling into the marrow. The kind of tiredness that came from packing up a life you thought was permanent and realizing you didn't recognize the pieces anymore. Alone. The word reverberated in the quiet. It wasn't just the lack of another person. It was the lack of shared history in these walls, the lack of laughter soaked into the floorboards, the lack of knowing where the light switch was in the dark. This house was a blank slate, cold and indifferent. The place to start over, they said. It felt more like a place to disappear. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint it could have been the house settling, or a branch scraping against the siding outside. But it came again. A soft, questioning chirp. Not a bird. Something closer. Sarah straightened up, listening intently. The rain hammered down. Silence stretched. Maybe she'd imagined it. Wishful thinking in a too-quiet house. She took a step towards the kitchen boxes, intending to find the kettle, desperate for the mundane ritual of making tea. Anything to fill the silence. MRP. It was clearer this time. A small, tentative sound, muffled but unmistakable. A cat's meow. Coming from behind her? She turned slowly. The sound seemed to emanate from the wall near the baseboard heater, close to the corner where the living room met a narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms and bathroom. Sarah knelt, the worn carpet scratchy against her knees. She pressed her ear to the faded floral wallpaper. It felt cool and slightly gritty. "Hello," she whispered, feeling slightly foolish. "Anybody in there?" Silence. Then a soft, vibrating purr. Faint but definite. It resonated through the wall, a tiny engine running somewhere hidden. followed by another soft, plaintive mew. A cat? Trapped? Lost? Living in the walls? The absurdity of it cut through the fog of her own melancholy. Here she was, feeling utterly lost and alone, and apparently, she wasn't the only one. She tapped gently on the wall with her knuckles. "Hey there? You okay?" The pause. Then, a hesitant, answering tap-tap from the other side. Like a tiny paw batting back. Sarah's breath caught. It was such a small, vulnerable sound, yet it pierced the heavy silence of the house like a pinprick of light. Loneliness recognized loneliness. She spent the next hour talking softly to the wall, coaxing, listening for the purrs and the occasional soft mew. She fetched a saucer of milk from a half-unpacked box, ignoring the fact that milk wasn't ideal for cats. It was all she had readily available, and slid it as close to the baseboard as possible. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against the opposite wall, watching the saucer. Waiting. Nothing happened for a long time. The rain lessened to a drizzle. The radiator hissed. The shadows in the room deepened. Sarah almost drifted off, lulled by the exhaustion and the rhythmic purring vibrating faintly through the plaster. Then movement. A tiny shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom near the baseboard heater. Not from a hole she could see, but from a space so narrow it seemed impossible. A small, triangular face emerged, cautiously. Wide, luminous green eyes, reflecting the dim light from the hallway. They blinked slowly, assessing her. The fur was a chaotic mix of ginger and white, like marmalade swirled into cream, thick and slightly matted. One ear had a distinct notch missing from the tip, a badge of past skirmishes. The cat froze, staring at Sarah, its whole body tense, ready to vanish back into the wall at the slightest provocation. Sarah held perfectly still. She didn't reach out. She didn't speak loudly. She just looked back, meeting that wary green gaze. She saw fear, yes, but also a fierce, fragile intelligence. And something else, a deep, quiet watchfulness. This wasn't just a stray. This was a creature who knew hiding, who understood silence and shadows intimately. Like her. "Hey," she breathed, the word barely a sigh. "It's okay." The cat's nostrils flared, sniffing the air towards the saucer of milk. Hunger warred with caution. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the small body emerged. A lean frame, ribs slightly visible beneath the thick fur. It crept towards the saucer, keeping one eye fixed on Sarah, its movements fluid but taut with tension. It reached the milk, dipped its head cautiously, lapped once, twice. Its purr, tentative before, rumbled louder now, a sound that filled the quiet corner of the room with surprising warmth. Sarah watched, mesmerized. The simple act of this small, hidden creature taking a risk, accepting a tiny offering of comfort in this strange, echoing house. It resonated deep within her own bruised heart. Her own loneliness hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, softened at the edges. She wasn't just Sarah, the divorced woman in the empty house anymore. She was Sarah, the woman who might have a cat living in her wall. The cat drank its fill, then sat back, licking its whiskers with meticulous care. It looked at Sarah again, its green eyes seeming less fearful now, more considering. It gave a soft PRT sound, a question mark hanging in the damp air. Then, without warning, it darted forward, not back into the wall, but towards Sarah. It stopped just inches from her crossed legs. It looked up at her face, its head tilted slightly. Its pink nose twitched. And then, in a movement so quick and delicate she almost missed it, it stretched out one white-tipped paw and gently, ever so gently, tapped the back of her hand where it rested on her knee. The touch was feather-light, cool and slightly damp. A spark of connection, pure and unexpected. Sarah froze, staring down at the small paw resting on her skin. The cat held her gaze for a long, breathless moment. Its purr deepened, becoming a steady, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate up her arm and into her chest, pushing back the chill that had settled there. As suddenly as it had touched her, the cat withdrew its paw. It gave her one last, unreadable look with those ancient green eyes, then turned and melted back into the impossibly narrow gap near the heater, disappearing into the hidden space within the wall as silently as a wisp of smoke. The soft purring faded, leaving behind only the sound of the dripping eaves and the thudding of Sarah's own heart. She sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the spot where the ginger and white cat had vanished. The empty saucer sat nearby. The spot on her hand where the tiny paw had rested felt strangely warm, imprinted. The house was still quiet, still smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The boxes still loomed. The rain still fell. But the crushing weight of loneliness, it had fractured just a little, replaced by a thrumming curiosity, a fragile thread of wonder. Who was this small creature sharing her walls? Why was it hiding? And what did it mean by that impossibly gentle touch? She touched the back of her hand again. The echo of that tiny paw tap lingered. The hollow ache in her chest hadn't disappeared, but it had been momentarily filled with something else, a quiet, insistent mystery, and the faintest, most unexpected spark of warmth. Something had shifted, not just for the cat venturing out, but for Sarah, anchored now by a single point of silent, green-eyed contact in the gloom. The quiet wasn't just silence anymore. It was the space between heartbeats, waiting. The story of this house, her story, wasn't just about absence anymore. It had just gained a hidden, purring heartbeat. And Sarah knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she needed to find it again. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It became the soundtrack to Sarah's tentative exploration of the house and her fragile, wordless relationship with the wall. The persistent drumming on the roof, the gurgle of water in the downspouts, the damp chill that seemed to seep up from the floorboards, it all created a cocoon, a world reduced to the small, dimly lit living room and the mystery residing within its plaster and laugh. Sarah didn't try to force the cat out. Instinct, a quiet voice she hadn't listened to in a long time, told her patience was the only currency this hidden creature would accept. She named it Marmalade, silently in her head. The chaotic swirl of ginger and white, the bright, watchful eyes, it fit. Naming it felt like acknowledging a presence, making it real beyond the fleeting glimpses and phantom purrs. Her days settled into a new, quiet rhythm dictated by Marmalade's hidden life. She woke to the sound of rain and the faintest scratching from inside the wall near the heater. Not frantic, more exploratory. Testing. She'd lie still in her sleeping bag on the inflatable mattress. The bed frame was still lost in the mist box jungle, listening. Sometimes, a soft, inquisitive would follow the scratching, as if the cat was asking the wall itself a question. Breakfast became a ritual. Sarah would move slowly, deliberately, making extra noise as she unpacked a box labeled kitchen, finding a chipped cereal bowl she didn't remember packing. She'd fill it with water and place it near the baseboard heater, replacing the long-gone milk saucer. Then, she'd carefully open a can of tuna she'd bought specifically for this purpose during a quick, rain-slicked dash to the corner store. The pungent, oily smell filled the small space immediately. She'd spoon half onto a small plate, placing it beside the water bowl. The other half went into the fridge for later. Her own breakfast was often forgotten until the coffee was cold. Then she'd retreat. Not far. Just to the old armchair she'd unearthed, its floral upholstery faded and smelling faintly of dust and old sunshine. She'd sit, a book open but unread on her lap, a mug of cooling coffee in her hands, and wait. Pretending not to watch. Pretending deep absorption in the weather-streaked window or the peeling wallpaper pattern. It took 2 days of tuna offerings before the small face appeared again. Just the eyes first, glowing emeralds in the gloom near the heater vent. Assessing the distance to the plate, the position of the large, quiet human in the chair. Sarah held her breath, keeping her gaze soft, unfocused. Marmalade emerged fully this time, a low, rumbling purr starting up before it even reached the food. It ate quickly, efficiently, glancing up frequently, ears swiveling like radar dishes catching every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind. When the plate was clean, it meticulously cleaned its whiskers, then sat for a moment, staring at Sarah. Not with fear this time. With consideration. A profound, silent calculation happening behind those luminous eyes. Sarah felt utterly seen, not just observed. It was unnerving and strangely comforting. She risked a slow blink, the universal feline signal of trust she'd read about years ago in a pet care pamphlet. Marmalade's eyes widened slightly. It didn't blink back. It just stared. Then, with a flick of its notched ear, it vanished back into the wall. The purring, however, didn't stop. It vibrated softly through the plaster, a constant, warm hum that became the baseline of Sarah's days. She found herself talking to the wall. Quietly at first, almost embarrassed. Rain's supposed to let up tomorrow, they say, though they've been saying that all week. The pause. The purr continued, steady. This wallpaper, it's truly something. Roses. Or maybe cabbages. Hard to tell under the grime. Another pause. The purr deepened slightly. I think I finally found the box with the coffee mugs. Minor victory. It felt less crazy as the days passed. The purr was a presence. A listener. Sarah had been holding so much inside. The collapse of her marriage hadn't been explosive, just a slow, cold erosion. Years of missed connections, conversations that died midair, a shared life that became 2 parallel tracks running silently beside each other. The guilt wasn't sharp, it was a dull, heavy ache. Guilt for staying too long. Guilt for leaving. Guilt for the relief she felt now, alone in this damp, quiet house, talking to a cat in a wall. Relief felt like betrayal. One afternoon, while attempting to scrape ancient adhesive off a window pane, a wave of it hit her. The loneliness, the guilt, the sheer weight of starting over at 42. She sank onto the dusty floorboards, her back against the cool wall, not Marmalade's wall, another one, and let the tears come. Silent, hot, the kind that squeezed your ribs and left you breathless. She buried her face in her knees, the rough denim scratchy against her skin. The house was utterly quiet. Even the rain had finally eased to a drizzle. The only sound was her own muffled breathing, the occasional hitch in her chest. Then a sound. Not the purr. The soft, concerned mew from Marmalade's wall. Then another. Closer. Sarah lifted her head, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. She looked towards the baseboard heater. Slowly, cautiously, Marmalade emerged. Not for food. The plates were empty. It crept out fully, its body low to the ground, tail slightly puffed but not aggressively so. It stopped a few feet away, staring at her with those intense green eyes. Sarah could see the slight tremor in its lean frame, the wariness still present, but overridden by something else. Concern? Curiosity about the strange, wet sounds the big human was making? It took a tentative step closer. Then another. Its nose twitched, sniffing the air thick with dust and salt tears. Sarah stayed perfectly still, her breath catching. Marmalade approached until it was just within arm's reach. It sat down, wrapping its ginger and white tail neatly around its paws. It didn't purr. It just watched her, a silent, furry sentinel in the dim light. Its gaze wasn't pitying, it was simply present, acknowledging her distress in its own quiet way. The simple act of emerging, of sitting there with her in her sadness, was a profound comfort. The heavy knot in Sarah's chest loosened, just a fraction. She wasn't entirely alone in her grief. This small, hidden creature had witnessed it. "Rough day, huh, Marmalade?" she whispered, her voice thick. The cat's ears twitched at the sound of its name, or perhaps just her voice. It blinked slowly, twice. Then, it stood up, stretched languidly, arching its back until the vertebrae popped faintly, and padded silently back to its hidden entrance. It paused at the gap, looked back at Sarah one more time with that inscrutable gaze, and slipped inside. The soft purr resumed almost immediately, a gentle thrumming lullaby against the silence. That evening, Sarah brought her sleeping bag and pillow into the living room. She unrolled them near Marmalade's wall, but not too close. She lay down, reading a battered paperback by the light of a single lamp. The rain had stopped, leaving a profound, dripping quiet outside. Inside, the radiator hissed, and the purr vibrated softly through the floorboards beneath her pillow. It was a grounding sound, a small engine of life humming in the stillness. She must have dozed off. She woke sometime later, disoriented in the near darkness, the lamp casting long, distorted shadows. The book lay splayed open on her chest. And then she felt it. A presence. A warmth. She turned her head slowly, careful not to startle. Marmalade was there. Not in the wall. On the floor. Curled into a tight, compact circle of ginger and white fur, barely a foot away from her sleeping bag. Close enough that Sarah could hear the soft, rhythmic sigh of its breathing, see the subtle rise and fall of its side. Close enough that she could smell it, not unpleasant, a warm, dusty, slightly sweet scent like sun on old blankets, mixed with the faint, clean odor of damp fur. It was asleep, deeply asleep by the looks of it, utterly vulnerable, trusting her enough to sleep outside the wall, near this giant, unpredictable human. Sarah lay perfectly still, afraid even to breathe too deeply. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it was a different kind of thudding than the hollow ache of loneliness. This was wonder. A fragile, hard-won connection settling over her like a warm blanket. She watched the small cat sleep, the notch in its ear visible in the lamplight, the way its whiskers twitched minutely with some dream. The radiator pinged. Marmalade's ear flicked, but it didn't wake. It just sighed, a soft, contented sound, and tucked its nose deeper into its fur. The purr, even in sleep, was a constant, soothing vibration Sarah could feel in the floorboards beneath her. She didn't move. She barely breathed. She just watched, bathed in the dim light and the profound trust radiating from the small, sleeping form. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. The scent of dust and old wood was now mingled with the warm, living smell of cat. The silence was filled with the gentle rhythm of Marmalade's breath and the soft, steady thrum of its contentment. Sarah closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to simply be in this moment. The cold knot of guilt and loneliness was still there, but it was smaller now, surrounded by this unexpected warmth. She had offered tuna and water. Marmalade, in its own quiet, fierce way, was offering something far more precious: companionship. And the first, fragile threads of trust spun in the silence of a rainy upstate night. She drifted back towards sleep, lulled by the sound of a tiny, living engine purring beside her on the dusty floor. The mystery of the wall was still there, but now it felt like a mystery shared. The fragile piece, woven from tuna, whispered confessions, and the shared silence of rainy nights, lasted almost 2 weeks. Marmalade became less a creature of the wall and more a tentative resident of the periphery. She'd emerge not just for meals, but to sit in a patch of weak sunlight slanting through the front window, meticulously grooming her chaotic fur until it gleamed. She'd watch Sarah unpack boxes with intense, unblinking focus, her head tilting at the clatter of dishes or the rustle of old papers. She began following Sarah, at a cautious distance, down the narrow hallway to the bathroom, waiting outside the door like a small, furry sentry, her green eyes fixed on the crack beneath it. At night, she no longer slept just near Sarah's sleeping bag. She'd curl up on the corner of it, a compact, purring paperweight radiating warmth against Sarah's feet. The house began to feel less like an empty shell and more like a shared space, slowly being filled. Sarah painted the small kitchen a soft, buttery yellow. She wrestled the ancient radiator into grudging cooperation. She even managed to assemble the bed frame, banishing the inflatable mattress to the basement. The scent of dust was gradually replaced by the smell of fresh paint, brewing coffee, and the warm, biscuity scent of Marmalade herself. But the wall remained Marmalade's sanctuary. The narrow gap near the baseboard heater was her private door, her escape hatch. She disappeared into it frequently, sometimes for hours, and Sarah respected that boundary. She'd hear the faint rustling, the occasional soft thump from within, but never pried. The mystery of what lay behind the faded cabbage roses wallpaper was Marmalade's domain. Then the scratching began. Not the exploratory, tentative scratching of the first days. This was different, insistent, focused. It started one evening as Sarah was washing dishes. A rhythmic, persistent scritch coming from Marmalade's wall. Not near the usual entrance, but further along, towards the corner where the living room met the hallway. Sarah paused, soapy sponge in hand, listening. Marmalade wasn't hidden. She was sitting on the armchair, watching Sarah. Her ears were pricked forward, her body tense, her gaze fixed not on Sarah, but on the section of wall where the scratching sound originated. "Marmalade?" Sarah called softly, turning off the faucet. The sudden silence made the scratching seem louder, more urgent. "What is it, sweetie?" The cat didn't look at her. Her tail twitched, the tip flicking like a metronome set to anxious. She gave a low, almost inaudible growl, deep in her throat. The scratching continued, scritch, sharp claws against plaster and laugh. Sarah walked over, kneeling near the spot. The wallpaper here was slightly darker, perhaps stained by years of proximity to the heater, or maybe just a different dye lot. She placed her palm flat against it. It felt cool, solid. "Hey," she murmured, more to the wall than to Marmalade. "What's going on in there?" The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Marmalade remained frozen on the armchair, her eyes wide, pupils dilated. Sarah withdrew her hand slowly. The moment stretched taut. Then, Marmalade launched herself off the chair, dashed across the room, and vanished into her usual gap near the heater. No purr followed. Just stillness. The next day, it happened again. And the next. Always at dusk, as the light began to fade and long shadows crept across the floor. Always in the same spot on the wall, about 3 feet to the left of the heater vent. Marmalade would be nearby, never participating, just watching with that unnerving intensity, her body rigid, her tail lashing. Sometimes she'd emit that low, rumbling growl. Other times, she'd just stare, her green eyes reflecting the dying light, filled with something Sarah couldn't decipher: anxiety? Expectation? A fierce protectiveness? Curiosity, initially tinged with amusement, began to curdle into unease. Sarah tried reasoning with herself. It's an old house. There are probably mice in the walls. Or squirrels. Marmalade's just reacting to a noise. But the insistence, the focus on that one spot, and Marmalade's strange, almost ritualistic observance, it felt different. More deliberate. Less like hunting, more like communication? Or a warning. The scratching became the punctuation mark to Sarah's evenings. She'd be reading, trying to relax, and the scritch would start, pulling her out of the story and into the unsettling mystery of her own living room wall. Marmalade's silent vigil beside her only amplified the tension. The warm companionship they'd built felt fractured, replaced by a shared, unspoken anxiety centered on a patch of faded wallpaper. Then came the letter. It arrived on a crisp, clear Saturday morning, sunlight finally streaming through the clean windows. Sarah was wrestling a box marked "Winter Clothes, Useless Now," when the mail slot clattered. Amongst the flyers for pizza delivery and a reminder from the town about leaf collection was a plain white envelope addressed in a shaky, spidery hand, to the new owner, 17 Elm Street. Inside, on a single sheet of lined notepaper, was a message. Dear new neighbor, welcome to Elm Street. My name is Edith Finley. I lived at number 17 for nearly 60 years. My Harold built it for us in '58. I hope the old place treats you kindly. It has good bones, though it needs love and maybe a new furnace. I had to move quickly to my daughter's in Albany after my fall last winter. Things were left in a bit of a state. I meant to come back and sort through properly, but time got away. Be careful with the back porch step, it's treacherous. And, well, perhaps it's silly, but keep an eye out for my little Ginger. She was my shadow. A stray who adopted me years ago. Tough little thing, ginger and white, one ear nicked. She vanished the day the movers came. Broke my heart. I left food out for weeks, nothing. I like to think she found a good barn somewhere. But if by some miracle, she'd know her name. Ginger. She loved tuna and the radiator vent in the living room. I miss her per most of all. Wishing you happiness in your new home. Sincerely, Edith Finley, Mrs. Sarah read it twice, sitting on the dusty floor amidst half-unpacked boxes. The sunlight felt suddenly too bright. Ginger. Ginger and white. One ear nicked. Loved the radiator vent. Tuna. Marmalade. Edith's ginger. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Marmalade wasn't a stray who'd found a convenient hole. She was Edith's beloved cat. She hadn't vanished, she'd hidden. Deep inside the walls of the only home she'd ever known, terrified by the strangers, the chaos, the disappearance of her person. She'd been here all along. Waiting. Hiding. Surviving. The enormity of it crashed over Sarah. The months of solitude Marmalade must have endured in the dark, cramped spaces within the walls. The fear, the confusion, the loyalty that kept her rooted here even when her world vanished. That gentle paw tap on Sarah's hand, had it been a desperate bid for connection? A test? The scratching, the focused, insistent scratching on that one section of wall. Was it random? Or was it purposeful? Did Marmalade associate that spot with Edith? With safety? With something important? Sarah looked towards the wall. Marmalade was sitting in her patch of sun, bathing. She looked up, meeting Sarah's gaze. Her green eyes held their usual watchfulness, but now Sarah saw layers beneath it she hadn't understood before. A deep, abiding confusion. An unwavering loyalty to a ghost. The warm contentment Sarah had started to feel in the house evaporated. It was replaced by a profound sense of responsibility, tinged with a sharp, unexpected grief for Edith Finley and the life she'd been forced to leave behind. And beneath it all, a thrumming tension centered on that patch of wall Marmalade scratched at every evening. What was back there? Was it just lath and plaster and decades of dust? Or was it something Marmalade remembered? Something Edith had left behind? Something Ginger needed to reach? That evening, the scratching started right on schedule. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Louder tonight, more frantic. Marmalade wasn't observing from the armchair. She was sitting directly in front of the spot, her body low, her tail whipping back and forth like an angry metronome. She wasn't growling, she was emitting a low, continuous whine, a sound Sarah had never heard her make before. It was a sound of distress, of intense focus, of demand. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room. The letter from Edith burned in her pocket. The purring companion was gone. In her place was a creature radiating focused tension, obsessed with a hidden point within the wall. The cozy mystery had curdled into something heavier, more urgent. The wall wasn't just Marmalade's sanctuary anymore. It felt like a barrier, a tomb, a silent plea. She couldn't ignore it. Not now. Not knowing Marmalade was Ginger, Edith's lost shadow. The scratching wasn't random noise. It felt like a message. A desperate, clawed SOS from the past. Sarah took a step towards the wall. Marmalade stopped scratching instantly. Her whine cut off. She spun around, staring at Sarah, her green eyes wide and unblinking. Not fearful, but alert. Watchful. Waiting. Sarah knelt, slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached out, not towards Marmalade, but towards the wall itself, towards the area where the relentless scratching had occurred. Her fingers brushed the faded wallpaper, rough and cool. "What is it, Marmalade?" she whispered, her voice thick. "Ginger? What are you trying to show me?" Marmalade didn't move, didn't blink. She just watched Sarah's hand on the wall, her entire body coiled with a silent, electric intensity. The purr was gone. The comfortable silence was gone. The room hummed with unspoken questions and the ghost of Edith Finley's sorrow. The scratching had stopped, but the tension hadn't broken. It had simply shifted, settling like a heavy cloak over Sarah and the small cat staring at the wall. A point of no return had been reached. The mystery within the plaster was no longer just Marmalade's secret. It was Sarah's burden now. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she would have to break through. The silence after Sarah's whispered question was profound, thick with plaster dust and decades of stillness. Marmalade didn't move, didn't blink. Her green eyes, fixed on Sarah's hand resting on the scarred wallpaper, held an intensity that felt ancient, demanding. The low whine had stopped, replaced by a vibrating tension in the small cat's frame, like a coiled spring. The air hummed with the ghost of Edith Finley's grief and Marmalade's, Ginger's, unspoken imperative. The comfortable boundaries of their tentative friendship had vaporized. The wall was no longer just a sanctuary, it was an accusation. A plea Sarah could no longer ignore. "Okay," Sarah breathed, the word tasting like dust. "Okay, marmalade. Ginger. Show me." She pushed herself up, her knees protesting. The letter from Edith crackled in her pocket, a tangible link to the sorrow embedded in these walls. She needed tools. A hammer. A pry bar. Something to rend the silence, to answer the scratching that had become a physical ache in her own chest. The basement was a cavern of shadows and forgotten things. The single bulb cast a sickly yellow light over stacks of warped cardboard boxes, an ancient washing machine that looked like a rusted sarcophagus, and shelves laden with jars of indeterminate contents. The air smelled of damp earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Sarah rummaged through a cobweb-draped workbench, her fingers closing around the cold, heavy grip of a claw hammer. She found a flat pry bar nearby, its edge nicked and dulled by time. Tools Harold Finley might have used. Tools that felt heavy with history. Back in the living room, Marmalade hadn't moved an inch. She remained a sentinel before the scratched section of wall, her gaze tracking Sarah's return with unnerving focus. Sarah dragged a kitchen chair over, positioning it squarely in front of the target area. She took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and dust suddenly sharp in her nostrils. This felt like violation, like tearing open a wound. But the small cat's unwavering stare offered no alternative. The first tap of the hammer against the wallpaper was absurdly loud. A sharp crack that echoed in the quiet room. Sarah flinched. Marmalade's ears flattened for a split second, then pricked forward again, intensely alert. Sarah tapped again, harder, creating a small dent in the plaster beneath the faded cabbage roses. Then she positioned the claw of the hammer and pulled. A brittle tearing sound, and a jagged strip of wallpaper peeled away, revealing the grayish-white plaster beneath, cracked and fragile with age. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light filtering through the window. Sarah worked methodically, her movements growing more confident, driven by the intensity radiating from the small cat at her feet. More wallpaper surrendered, falling in brittle curls to the worn carpet. Soon, a patch about 2 feet square was stripped bare, revealing the cracked and pockmarked plaster skin of the wall. Marmalade began to pace. Slow, deliberate circuits around Sarah's chair, her tail held high but rigid, the tip twitching. Her purr started, not the deep, contented thrum Sarah knew, but a higher-pitched, almost anxious vibration. Purity? Purity? It was a sound of anticipation, of barely contained urgency. Sarah switched to the pry bar, wedging its flat end into a hairline crack in the plaster. She levered gently. A chunk the size of her fist broke away with a dry crunch, revealing the dark cavity behind, the rough, vertical wooden studs of the lath framework, and the shadowy space between them, thick with decades of accumulated dust and cobwebs that hung like gray lace. The smell that wafted out was overwhelming. Dry rot, ancient insulation, mouse droppings, and the profound, musty stillness of time sealed away. Marmalade froze. She stopped pacing, her entire body rigid, her nose pointed towards the dark opening. Her purr cut off abruptly. She took a single, hesitant step forward, then another, until she was right beside Sarah's leg, staring intently into the blackness. Her green eyes seemed to pierce the gloom. Sarah peered in, squinting. It was dark, claustrophobic. She could see thick layers of dust coating the horizontal lath strips, the rough edges of the studs. Nothing else. Just emptiness. A wave of doubt crashed over her. Had she imagined it all? Projected meaning onto a cat's instinctive scratching? Was this just a dusty cavity, and Marmalade's fixation merely a confused echo of old memories? Disappointment, sharp and cold, pricked at her eyes. She started to pull the pry bar back. "Marmalade, I don't see." The cat reacted instantly, with a sharp W. A sound Sarah had never heard from her before, loud and insistent. Marmalade lunged. Not at Sarah, but at the hole. She thrust her head and one ginger and white paw deep into the opening, scrabbling frantically at the thick dust coating the inside surface of the adjacent wall stud. Dust billowed out in a choking cloud. "Hey, careful!" Sarah coughed, waving a hand. But Marmalade ignored her. She pulled her paw back, shook it, sending dust flying, then plunged it back in, digging with fierce, focused determination. Her claws scraped against the old wood. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was horrifyingly familiar, amplified now, coming from within the wall she just breached. Driven by the cat's desperate energy, Sarah shoved the pry bar deeper into the hole, leveraging against the adjacent lath strip. With a splintering crack, a larger section of plaster gave way, tumbling inward. More dust exploded into the room. Marmalade jumped back, sneezing violently, her eyes watering, but she immediately surged forward again, pawing frantically at the newly exposed area. Sarah grabbed the flashlight from her phone, shining its beam into the widening gap. The dust swirled like fog in the light. Marmalade's paw was batting at something tucked deep into the corner where the vertical stud met the horizontal lath. Something not made of wood or plaster. Something wrapped in what looked like oilcloth? Or heavy, waxed paper? Heart hammering against her ribs, Sarah reached in. The space was tight, gritty. Her fingers brushed against the rough wood, then closed on the object. It was small, rectangular, wrapped tightly in brittle, yellowed paper that crackled at her touch. She pulled it out carefully. Marmalade immediately stopped digging. She sat back on her haunches, staring at the bundle in Sarah's dusty hand, her chest heaving, her eyes wide and unblinking. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. Awaiting. Sarah's hands trembled as she sat back on the chair, the bundle resting on her lap. The oilcloth wrapping was tied with a thin, disintegrating piece of twine. She carefully picked at the knot, her fingers clumsy with dust and adrenaline. The twine snapped. Slowly, she unfolded the stiff, crackling paper. Inside lay three things. First, a small, square photograph. Black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a woman with soft, white curls and a kind, crinkled smile, sitting in a rocking chair on what looked like the front porch of this very house. Beside her, perched proudly on the arm of the chair, sat a younger Marmalade ginger. Her fur was sleeker, her eyes just as bright and green, gazing directly at the camera with an expression of serene ownership. The woman's hand rested gently on the cat's back. Edith and Ginger. Unmistakable. A sob caught in Sarah's throat. The confirmation was a physical blow. This was Ginger, Edith's shadow. The love in the photograph was palpable, radiating from the faded paper. Beside the photo lay a small, tarnished brass key. Simple, unadorned. It looked like it might fit a diary or a small box. And finally, a folded piece of paper, slightly larger than the photograph, the same lined notepaper as Edith's recent letter, but more brittle, the ink faded to a watery blue. Sarah unfolded it with shaking hands. "My dearest Ginger, if you're reading this, my brave girl, it means you found our secret spot. Clever thing. I knew you would. I'm writing this quickly, my hands aren't so steady anymore, and that nice young man from the moving company is waiting. I don't want to go, my sweet shadow. This house is full of Harold and you and all our years. My heart feels like it's breaking clean in two. But Doris insists Albany is best, and maybe she's right. This old place is too much now. I can't bear the thought of putting you in a carrier, taking you from your home. You've always hated them so. And Doris's apartment, it's no place for a free spirit like you. I've left food and water, hoping, praying you'll find your way back inside, or that a kind neighbor will take you in. I told Mrs. Henderson down the street to watch for you. But I know you, my stubborn girl. You love your hidey holes. This key? It's for the little rosewood box on my dresser. Harold gave it to me on our 25th. Inside are my pearls, nothing fancy but real. And the deed to the house. Silly, I know, keeping it there, but it felt safe. Harold always said that box was our treasure chest. If you find this and someone kind finds you, maybe show them? So they know you belonged here. So they know you were loved. Deeply loved, my ginger snap. More than words. Be brave. Be safe. Find sunshine and soft laps. All my love always. Pity. The words blurred. Sarah's vision swam. Tears, hot and unchecked, streamed down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the plaster dust. She wasn't just reading a note, she was witnessing a heart-breaking. Edith's agonizing choice, her desperate hope, her profound love for this small creature now staring up at her with ancient, knowing eyes. The sacrifice of leaving Ginger behind, hoping for kindness, hoping her beloved cat would find a way to reveal her final hidden message. The loyalty that had kept Ginger hiding, waiting, scratching at the memory of her person's secret. The grief wasn't just Edith's anymore. It wasn't just Ginger's. It flooded Sarah, a wave of shared sorrow for the impermanence of things, for love lost, for homes abandoned. She wept for Edith, forced from her sanctuary. She wept for Ginger, months of terror and loneliness in the dark. She wept for her own lost marriage, the hollow ache of starting over. The dust on her hands, the tear-stained letter, the small brass key, they were all anchors in a sea of overwhelming emotion. A soft pressure against her leg. Marmalade Ginger had stepped closer. She didn't meow. She didn't purr. She simply leaned her small, warm body against Sarah's shin, resting her chin on Sarah's knee. Her green eyes looked up, not at the letter or the photo, but directly into Sarah's wet, red-rimmed eyes. There was no judgment there. No demand. Only a deep, quiet understanding. A shared recognition of loss. Sarah dropped the letter and the photo onto her lap. Her dusty, trembling hand reached down, not to pick up the cat, but simply to rest on her head, between the notched ear and the soft, warm crown. Ginger didn't flinch. She pressed up into the touch, a small, deliberate movement. Her eyes closed slowly, then opened again, holding Sarah's gaze. In that moment, the reflection was perfect, heartbreaking. Sarah saw her own loneliness mirrored in the cat's long vigil. She saw Edith's love reflected in Ginger's fierce loyalty. And Ginger seemed to see Sarah's tears, her compassion, her willingness to break open the wall for a hidden message. She saw someone who saw her, who knew she was Ginger, Edith's Ginger, not just Marmalade, the wall cat. A low rumble started deep in Ginger's chest. Not the anxious purr from before. Not the deep contentment of shared sleep. This was different. Softer. Deeper. A resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from her very core, a sound of profound release, of sorrow acknowledged, of a burden shared. It was the sound of an engine finally coming home after a long, perilous journey. It was the purr Edith had missed most of all. Sarah slid off the chair, down onto the dusty floor amidst the debris of plaster and torn wallpaper. She didn't pull Ginger into her lap. She simply opened her arms. Ginger hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then, with a grace that belied her chaotic fur, she stepped forward, climbed onto Sarah's crossed legs, circled once, and settled down, curling into a tight, warm circle. Her purr intensified, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through Sarah's entire body, grounding her, anchoring her in the midst of the emotional storm. Sarah wrapped her arms gently around the small, warm body, burying her face in the thick fur at Ginger's neck. She smelled of dust and plaster, but beneath it was the warm, clean, biscuity scent of cat, of life persisting. Sarah wept freely now, her tears soaking into Ginger's fur, her sobs muffled against the softness. Ginger didn't move. She simply purred, a steady, unwavering counterpoint to Sarah's ragged breaths, a small, living engine of comfort in the wreckage of the wall and the flood of shared grief. The afternoon light slanted lower, painting golden stripes across the dust motes still dancing in the air. The room was a mess, chunks of plaster, torn wallpaper, tools abandoned. But amidst the rubble on the dusty floor sat Sarah, holding Edith Finley's lost treasure. Not the pearls, not the deed, but Ginger, and the profound, wordless understanding that sometimes healing begins when you break open the wall to find the hidden heartache and discover you're not alone in the dark. The purr was a lifeline, a bridge across time and loss, connecting three souls in the quiet aftermath of revelation. The scratching had stopped. The silence it left behind was no longer empty. It was filled with the resonant, healing thrum of a small cat finally coming home. The dust settled. Literally. A fine, gray powder coated every surface in the living room. The abandoned chair, the scattered tools, the torn strips of Cabbage Rose wallpaper, Sarah's jeans, and Ginger's chaotic fur. The hole in the wall gaped, a dark, ragged mouth breathing out the scent of decades past. Yet, amidst the physical wreckage, a profound stillness had descended. Not silence, but the deep, resonant quiet that follows a storm, saturated with the memory of thunder but filled now with an almost sacred calm. Sarah sat on the floor, legs crossed, Ginger a warm, purring weight in her lap. The cat hadn't moved since settling there, her small body vibrating with a purr that felt less like sound and more like a fundamental frequency humming through Sarah's bones. It was a different purr. Not the tentative rumble of the wall days, nor the anxious thrum of anticipation before the digging. This was deeper, richer, emanating from a place of profound release. The purr of a creature who had finally been seen, whose long vigil had been acknowledged, whose hidden message had been delivered. Sarah's tears had slowed, leaving salty tracks on her dusty cheeks, but the ache in her chest had shifted. It wasn't gone, the hollow space left by her own losses, but it felt different. Filled, not with absence, but with the warm, living weight of Ginger and the echoing presence of Edith Finley's love. Ginger lifted her head, those luminous green eyes meeting Sarah's. There was no wariness now, no calculation, just a deep, quiet watchfulness that held a new softness. She blinked slowly, deliberately. Sarah blinked back, a silent language passing between them. I know you. You know me. We are here. The moment stretched, suspended in the golden afternoon light filtering through the dust motes. Then, practicality, like a gentle tide, began to seep back in. Sarah couldn't leave the wall gaping open. Ginger needed a proper meal, not just tuna remnants. and the small, oilcloth-wrapped bundle lay beside them on the dusty floor, Edith's final message, and the tarnished brass key. Gently, Sarah shifted. Ginger stood up, stretched languidly, arching her back until her spine crackled softly, and hopped down. She didn't retreat to the wall or hide. She sat nearby, watching as Sarah carefully gathered the photograph, the fragile letter, and the key. She placed them reverently on the small, cleared corner of the coffee table, weighted down by the claw hammer to keep them safe from any stray draft. First the wall. The hole was jagged, exposing the wooden lath and studs like skeletal ribs. Sarah couldn't properly repair it now, not without materials. But she could make it safe, less like an open wound. She found a flattened cardboard box in the basement, cut a piece slightly larger than the opening, and carefully wedged it into place from the inside, securing it temporarily with duct tape around the edges on the living room side. It was crude, a gray patch on the faded wallpaper, but it closed off the dark cavity. Ginger watched the entire process, her tail twitching occasionally, but she made no move towards the patched area. The scratching spot had served its purpose. Next, Ginger. Sarah filled the water bowl with fresh, cool water. She opened a new can of tuna, the rich smell filling the room, and placed it in Ginger's usual dish. The cat approached, sniffed delicately, then began to eat with a focused, almost dainty intensity Sarah hadn't seen before. It wasn't the frantic gobbling of a hidden creature afraid its meal would disappear. It was the calm consumption of an animal who knew the food source was secure. Who knew she was secure. While Ginger ate, Sarah brewed strong tea. The familiar ritual, the clink of the spoon, the hiss of the kettle, the warm, malty scent, grounded her. She carried her mug back to the living room, surveying the dust-coated chaos. It felt symbolic, this mess. The external manifestation of the internal upheaval she'd just experienced. Cleaning it up wouldn't erase Edith's sorrow or Ginger's months of hiding, but it was a step towards order. Towards inhabiting this space fully, with its newly revealed history. She started slowly, sweeping up the larger chunks of plaster and brittle wallpaper, wiping down surfaces with a damp cloth, the gray grime coming away in streaks. Ginger, finished with her tuna, followed her around the room, not pacing anxiously, but observing with quiet interest. She'd find a patch of sunlight near the newly patched wall, curl up, and watch Sarah work, her purr a soft, constant accompaniment to the swish of the broom. Sometimes she'd get up, weave figure eights around Sarah's ankles, a gentle, tactile acknowledgement, then return to her sunspot. As Sarah cleaned, her mind circled back to the rosewood box. Edith's treasure chest. On my dresser, the letter had said. Sarah hadn't ventured much into the small back bedroom yet. It had felt like intruding. Now, it felt like a necessary pilgrimage. She hesitated at the doorway. The room was dim, smelling faintly of camphor and disuse. An old, heavy oak dresser stood against one wall, its surface bare except for a thin layer of dust and a circular mark where something had clearly sat for a very long time. The rosewood box was gone. Edith must have taken it with her, or perhaps Doris had packed it. Disappointment flickered, quickly replaced by understanding. Of course Edith would have taken her pearls, the deed, the tangible symbols of her life with Harold. The key left behind wasn't for opening the box, it was a symbol itself. A token of trust left for Ginger to bestow. Proof of belonging. Sarah turned to leave, her gaze sweeping the room. Then she saw it, tucked partly under the edge of the faded floral bedspread, near the leg of the bed. A small, rectangular shape. She walked over and knelt. It was a photograph, face down. She picked it up carefully. Another black and white image, older than the one of Edith and Ginger. A wedding photo. A young Harold Finley, handsome and serious in a sharp suit, beaming beside a radiant Edith in a simple lace dress, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Their eyes shone with hope, with a future stretching out before them in the little house on Elm Street. On the back, in faded ink, Harold and Edie, June 12, 1958. Our beginning. Sarah's breath hitched. Edith must have dropped it in the rush of leaving. A tiny fragment of her beginning, left behind. She carried it back to the living room, placing it gently beside the other photo on the coffee table. Two bookends, the hopeful start and the poignant end of a life lived within these walls. Ginger patted over, sniffed the new photo curiously, then looked up at Sarah, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. The days that followed were a quiet dance of repair and reflection. Sarah bought plaster, joint compound, sandpaper. She learned, through clumsy trial and error, how to patch a wall. The process was slow, messy, therapeutic. As she smoothed the wet plaster over the cardboard patch, filling the ragged edges, smoothing the surface, it felt like tending to a wound. Ginger was a constant presence. She'd sit nearby, often on the arm of the old chair Edith had likely sat in, watching Sarah work with that same quiet intensity. Sometimes she'd trill softly, a new sound, a gentle, inquisitive chirrup. The wall repair became a ritual. Sanding the dried plaster created a fine white dust that coated everything again, but it smelled clean new. Painting over the patch with a test pot of paint, a soft, warm gray, felt like an act of consecration. The hole was gone. The mystery revealed. The wall was just a wall again, but one that held a profound secret, a silent witness to love and loss and unexpected connection. Ginger's transformation was subtle but profound. She no longer disappeared into the wall for hours. The gap near the heater remained, but she used it less frequently and never with the old urgency. She explored the house with a new confidence. Sarah found her one morning curled up on Edith's old bed, asleep in a patch of sun. Another time, she discovered her sitting upright on Harold's dresser, gazing out the back window at the overgrown yard with the regal stillness of a queen surveying her domain. She claimed Sarah's lap whenever Sarah sat down, her purr a constant, comforting presence. She developed a habit of greeting Sarah at the door when she returned from errands, not with frantic meows, but with a soft pew and a slow blink. The frantic scratching at the wall never returned. The tension that had crackled in the air before the breaking point had dissolved, replaced by a deep, shared peace. Sarah still talked to Ginger, but the confessions felt lighter. She spoke of the paint colors she was considering for the bedroom, the persistent leak under the kitchen sink, the funny-shaped cloud she'd seen that morning. Ginger listened, purring, sometimes reaching out a paw to gently tap Sarah's arm, mirroring that first, tentative connection. One crisp afternoon, Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, Edith's letter and the two photographs spread before her. The brass key lay beside them. She picked up the phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. Doris Finley's number, found through a combination of online searches and a hesitant call to Mrs. Henderson down the street, who remembered Edith and Ginger fondly and had indeed put food out for weeks, was written on a scrap of paper. Taking a deep breath, Sarah dialed. It rang several times. She almost hung up. "Hello." A woman's voice, brisk but not unkind. "Hello, is this Doris Finley? My name is Sarah Evans. I live at 17 Elm Street now. Your mother's old house." The pause. "Oh, hello." Doris's voice held caution, perhaps a flicker of old worry. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Sarah began, her voice tight. I found something. Something of your mother's. I found Ginger." Silence stretched on the line, so long Sarah thought the connection had dropped. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Ginger? You found Ginger? Mom's cat? But she vanished. Months ago. We thought coyotes or—" "She was here," Sarah said softly, looking over at Ginger, who was washing her paw with meticulous care on the sun-warmed linoleum. "Hiding. Inside the walls." "Inside the—" Doris sounded stunned. "All this time? Oh, that poor, stubborn thing. Mom was heartbroken. Absolutely heartbroken. She cried for weeks." Doris's voice cracked slightly. Is she okay?" "She's right here," Sarah said, warmth filling her voice. "She's thin, but she's eating well now. She's amazing." She told Doris about the scratching, the letter hidden in the wall, the photograph, the key. She described Ginger's watchful eyes, her purr, her newfound confidence. Doris listened, interrupting only with soft gasps or murmured words like, or, "That sounds just like Ginger." When Sarah finished, there was another long silence, filled with the faint static of the line and Ginger's rhythmic grooming sounds. "The key," Doris said finally, her voice thick. "The rosewood box. She took it with her. It's here on her nightstand. She kept her pearls in it, and Dad's wedding ring after he passed, and yes, the deed. She always said it was safer there than in a bank." Doris gave a watery chuckle. "Silly, stubborn woman. And Ginger, she left that message for her? In the wall?" "I think Ginger was trying to show me," Sarah said. "Because Edith couldn't be here. Because Ginger knew. She knew it was important Edith's message was found." She paused. "I also found a photo. A wedding photo. Harold and Edie. It must have fallen." "June 12, 1958, Doris whispered. "Dad built that house for her. That photo, she loved it. She must have been looking at it before the fall." Doris took a shaky breath. "Miss Evans." "Sarah, thank you. Thank you for finding her. For finding Ginger. And for finding Mom's message. It means more than I can say. Knowing Ginger is safe, knowing Mom's last thoughts for her," she trailed off. "Ginger is safe," Sarah assured her. "She's home." The words felt true as she said them. 17 Elm Street was Ginger's home. And now, strangely, irrevocably, it was Sarah's too. They talked a little longer. Doris shared snippets, how Edith missed the house terribly, how the Albany apartment felt cramped and alien, how she talked about Harold and Ginger constantly. Sarah promised to send the wedding photo. Doris, her voice warm now, insisted Sarah keep the other photo of Edith and Ginger. "It belongs there," she said. "With Ginger. And with you now." After hanging up, Sarah sat for a long time, the receiver warm in her hand. The late afternoon sun slanted across the kitchen table, illuminating the brass key, the photographs, the letter. Ginger finished her bath, stretched, and jumped onto the table. She didn't investigate the objects. She simply walked over, nudged Sarah's hand with her head, and settled down beside the photos, curling up with a sigh. Her purr started again, a soft, contented rumble. Sarah looked from the hopeful young faces in the wedding photo to the kind, crinkled smile of Edith with her beloved cat, then down at the living Ginger, warm and solid beside her. The house was quiet, filled only with the cat's purr and the settling sounds of an old building. The mystery of the wall was solved. the message delivered, the past acknowledged. Life hadn't magically become easy. The divorce papers were still in a folder. The furnace still rattled ominously. The back porch step was still treacherous. But the crushing loneliness that had greeted Sarah on that rainy October day had transformed. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer a suffocating void. It was a space now shared, warmed by the purr of a small cat who had endured her own darkness and emerged. The grief for Edith, for Harold, for her own lost marriage, was still present, but it felt integrated, like the patched wall, a part of the structure, smoothed over, no longer raw. Sarah reached out and gently stroked Ginger's head, her fingers tracing the familiar notch in her ear. Ginger leaned into the touch, her purr deepening. Sarah picked up the wedding photo. Harold and Edie, beaming. Our beginning. She looked around her kitchen, at the patched wall visible through the doorway, at the cat sleeping beside Edith's final message. This wasn't an ending. It was a different kind of beginning. Not the hopeful, unblemished start of Harold and Edie in 1958, but a quieter, more complex one. A beginning woven from endings, patched together with plaster and understanding, warmed by the resilient purr of a small, ginger and white cat who had finally led someone home. The house on Elm Street wasn't just hers, or Ginger's, or even Edith's anymore. It was theirs. A shared history, a shared present, and a future quietly unfolding, one soft purr, one repaired wall, one gentle paw tap at a time. The silence held no dread now. It held peace, and the promise of sunlight on fur, and the soft weight of companionship on her lap. Life settled into a rhythm at 17 Elm Street, a rhythm measured in purrs and the quiet hum of restoration. The patched wall in the living room, now painted a warm gray that complemented the remaining cabbage roses, stood as a silent monument to the breaking point and the healing that followed. It wasn't hidden, nor was it a focal point. It was simply there, a healed scar in the fabric of the house, a reminder of the hidden story now fully integrated. Ginger, no longer Marmalade the wall phantom, moved through the rooms with a proprietorial air. She claimed windowsills, sunbeams, and Sarah's lap with equal authority. Her purr was a near-constant soundtrack, a low, contented thrum that seemed to vibrate from the very floorboards, warming the space Edith Finley's absence had left cold. Sarah sent the wedding photo to Doris. A brief, warm note accompanied it, reiterating Ginger's well-being and Sarah's promise that she had a forever home at Elm Street. Doris called again, her voice lighter this time, filled with gratitude and shared reminiscences about her mother. She confirmed Edith had the rosewood box, safe with Harold's ring and her pearls. The small brass key Sarah possessed was truly a token, a physical key to a metaphorical treasure chest, the proof of Ginger's belonging and Edith's desperate, loving trust. Sarah framed the photo of Edith and Ginger. It sat on the old oak dresser in the living room, a small altar to the house's previous chapter. Ginger would often jump up, sit beside it, and gaze at the image of her younger self and her beloved human, sometimes emitting a soft, thoughtful chirp. She never seemed distressed. It was more like visiting an old friend. Sarah would watch her, a lump forming in her throat, marveling at the depth of memory held within that small, furry skull. The house continued to reveal its secrets slowly, not through walls this time, but through the process of making it a home. Unpacking the last of the misc boxes yielded forgotten treasures. A chipped mug Sarah's grandmother had given her, a worn poetry anthology filled with underlined passages, a soft cashmere scarf that still held the faintest trace of her old perfume. Each discovery felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd packed away during the marriage, pieces muted or neglected. Ginger was an attentive observer of these excavations, often batting playfully at loose threads on the scarf or curling up on the open pages of the poetry book. One rainy afternoon, much like the day Sarah had arrived, she decided to tackle the small, cluttered closet under the stairs. It was a jumble of old paint cans, tangled extension cords, a dusty vacuum cleaner, and boxes labeled in Harold Finley's neat, blocky handwriting: Zmaz decorations, garden tools, miscellaneous hardware. Sarah pulled out the hardware box, sneezing as dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight. Inside were jars of mismatched screws and nails, rolls of wire, a few ancient plumbing fittings, and something wrapped in oilcloth, similar to the bundle from the wall, but smaller and flatter. Her breath hitched. Ginger, who had been investigating a cobweb in the corner, immediately trotted over, her tail held high, her green eyes fixed on the bundle. She sat down beside Sarah's knee, watching intently, her purr kicking up a notch, not anxious, but anticipatory. With careful fingers, Sarah lifted the bundle. It was about the size of a thin hardcover book. The oilcloth was brittle, tied with the same kind of decaying twine. Ginger nudged Sarah's hand with her head, a soft "eh" escaping her. "Another secret, Ginger?" Sarah murmured, her heart thudding with a familiar mix of trepidation and curiosity. Did Edith leave this too? Or Harold? She carried the bundle to the kitchen table, Ginger pacing alongside her. Carefully, she picked at the knot. The twine snapped easily. Unfolding the stiff oilcloth revealed not another letter, but a sheaf of papers. Blueprints. Hand-drawn, faded pencil lines on brittle, yellowed drafting paper. The title scrawled across the top in a strong, masculine hand: Proposed alterations, 17 Elm Street, Harold Finley, October 1962. Sarah spread the fragile sheets out gently. They showed detailed plans for the house. Not the original build, but modifications. Her eyes scanned the familiar layout of the living room, the hallway, the bedrooms. Then she saw it. A section marked in bold pencil: Proposed chase/wall void, access for plumbing/electrical and potential storage/cat access. Her gaze flew to the living room wall, the patched section. The blueprints showed a deliberate cavity built into that specific interior wall during a renovation Harold had done, running vertically from the basement to the attic space. It wasn't just happenstance, it was designed. Designed for utilities, yes, but Harold had explicitly noted adequate space for small storage nooks at intervals. Ventilation grates planned. Could provide interior highway for cat. Sarah traced the pencil lines with a trembling finger. Harold Finley, Edith's beloved husband, the builder of this house, had intentionally created hidden spaces within the walls. Not just for pipes and wires, but with his wife's shadow, their cat, a predecessor to Ginger, in mind. He'd built a secret highway, a feline sanctuary woven into the very bones of the home. Ginger jumped onto the table, walking delicately across the blueprints. She stopped directly over the diagram of the living room wall void, the very section Sarah had broken open. She sniffed the paper, then looked up at Sarah, her green eyes luminous. She gave a soft, distinct MRP, the same sound she'd made when Sarah first tapped on the wall months ago. Then she deliberately headbutted Sarah's hand resting near the blueprint. The realization washed over Sarah like a warm wave. It wasn't just Edith who had loved her cats fiercely. Harold had loved Edith enough to build her cat into the house. He'd understood the need for hideaways, for secret paths, for safe spaces. Ginger hadn't just randomly hidden in a convenient gap. She had inherited an ancestral knowledge, an instinct passed down perhaps through feline residence over the decades, to utilize the spaces Harold Finley had thoughtfully provided. The wall void wasn't just a hiding place, it was a legacy. A love letter from Harold to Edith, manifested in lumber and plaster, a gift for generations of feline shadows. And Ginger had known. Not consciously, perhaps, but in her bones. That's why she'd hidden there. That's why she'd felt safe enough to stay. That's why she'd scratched that specific spot, not just because of Edith's hidden message nearby, but because it was a point of access, a node in Harold's designed highway. She'd been trying to access her inheritance, her birthright. Sarah looked from the blueprint to Ginger, who was now rubbing her cheek against the edge of the paper, purring loudly. The final piece clicked into place. The house hadn't just sheltered Edith and Harold's love, it had been shaped by it, physically altered to accommodate the creatures who shared their lives. Ginger wasn't just Edith's cat, she was the inheritor of Harold's architectural empathy. Her presence, her survival in the walls, was a testament to a love so deep it had literally built safe passage into the structure of their home. The impact was staggering. Sarah had felt compassion for Ginger's ordeal, sorrow for Edith's loss. But this revealed a layer of profound, enduring love that transcended the individuals. It was a love embedded in the walls, in the blueprints, in the very idea of sanctuary Harold had constructed. Ginger wasn't just a rescued cat, she was the living embodiment of that decades-old love story. Her purr was the echo of Harold's hammer, her green eyes reflected Edith's tenderness, her presence was the continuity of a home built, quite literally, with love and cats in mind. The practical revelation was just as potent. The blueprints explained the strange, accessible voids Ginger navigated. They showed ventilation points Sarah hadn't noticed, cleverly disguised. They even indicated a small, forgotten access panel in the basement ceiling, near the furnace, that might lead into the void. Harold hadn't just built a hidey hole, he'd engineered a system. In the days that followed, Sarah carefully preserved the fragile blueprints, placing them in a clear archival sleeve. She studied them, not just as a homeowner understanding her quirky house, but as someone deciphering a love letter. She found the small access panel in the basement, hidden behind some old insulation. Opening it revealed a dark, dusty space, smelling of earth and time, but clearly part of Harold's highway. She didn't crawl in, that was Ginger's domain. But knowing it was there, knowing it was intentional, changed her perception of the house completely. One evening, Sarah sat on the floor beside the patched wall, the framed photo of Edith and Ginger nearby. Ginger lay sprawled in her lap, purring, one white-tipped paw resting on Sarah's arm. Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth, repainted patch. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to Ginger. "Not just Edith's secret. You knew this whole house was built with creatures like you in mind. That you belonged here, deep in its bones, long before I showed up." Ginger opened one green eye, regarded Sarah sleepily, and stretched, digging her claws gently into Sarah's jeans. A soft peel vibrated against Sarah's leg. Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't seal the gap near the heater vent entirely. Harold had designed ventilation for a reason. Instead, she carefully cleaned the area, removing loose plaster and dust. Then she built something. Using scrap wood from the basement and a piece of sanded plywood, she fashioned a small, discreet shelf. Just large enough for a cat. She secured it low on the wall, directly beside the heater vent, partly obscuring but not blocking the gap. She sanded it smooth and painted it the same warm gray as the patch. It wasn't hidden, It was a tiny, intentional platform. A perch. A lookout. A visible acknowledgement of the invisible highway within. When it was finished, she placed a small, soft cushion on it. Ginger watched the entire process with keen interest. The moment Sarah stepped back, Ginger jumped down from her lap, approached the new shelf, sniffed it thoroughly, then, with effortless grace, leaped up. She circled once, kneaded the cushion with her paws, sending puffs of dust from its surface into the air, and settled down. She sat upright, regal, surveying her living room kingdom from this new vantage point, right beside the entrance to Harold's secret highway. Her purr deepened, resonating with profound satisfaction. Sarah sat back on her heels, watching. The gift hadn't been the pearls, or the deed. It hadn't even been Ginger herself, though she was an immeasurable treasure. The final gift, the one Ginger had led her to discover through her instinct and the blueprint she'd somehow prompted Sarah to find, was the understanding, the revelation of the depth of love that had shaped this house. Harold's love for Edith, manifesting in thoughtful carpentry for her feline companion. Edith's love for Ginger, leading her to leave a hidden plea. And now, Sarah's love for Ginger, expressed in building her a visible throne at the gateway to her ancestral passage. Ginger's purr filled the room, a warm, living counterpoint to the silent blueprints safely stored away. She had delivered her final message. This house wasn't just shelter. It was a living archive of love, built layer upon layer, Harold's for Edith, Edith's for Ginger, and now, Sarah's for Ginger and the legacy she carried. The small cat on her shelf wasn't just a pet, she was the guardian of that archive, the heir to the hidden highways, the purring heart of a home built, quite literally, on love. The key hadn't opened a box. It had unlocked the true soul of 17 Elm Street, and Ginger had been the keeper of the lock all along. Sarah reached out and gently stroked the fur between Ginger's notched ear and her temple. Ginger leaned into the touch, her purr a tangible vibration of belonging, a sound that now seemed to resonate from the very walls Harold Finley had built with love. The story wasn't just about rescue, it was about inheritance. And Sarah finally understood she wasn't just the owner. She was the next steward in a long line of love, guided by a pair of ancient green eyes. The first frost etched delicate, feathery patterns on the window pane beside Ginger's shelf. Outside, Elm Street lay hushed under a blanket of pristine white, the skeletal branches of the trees wearing lace gloves of snow. Inside 17 Elm Street, warmth radiated, not just from the grumbling, but finally reliable furnace, but from a deeper, quieter source. Sarah sat in Edith's old rocking chair, a mug of steaming tea warming her hands, watching the cat who was no longer a secret, but the beating heart of the home. Ginger, a compact loaf of marmalade and cream fur, was curled on her special cushion, the one Sarah had placed on the small gray shelf beside the heater vent, the visible gateway to Harold's hidden highway. Her eyes were half closed in contentment, her purr a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate the very air. It was a sound Sarah had come to know as intimately as her own breath. The sound of safety, the sound of belonging, the sound of a small, enduring engine fueled by decades of love literally built into the walls around them. Life had settled, not into perfect stillness, but into a rhythm rich with shared history and quiet purpose. The frantic unpacking was done. Boxes replaced by Sarah's books on reclaimed shelves, her grandmother's mug-holding pens on the desk she'd found at a flea market, the cashmere scarf draped over the back of the rocking chair. The house smelled of pine-scented cleaner, brewing coffee, fresh bread Sarah was learning to bake, and the warm, biscuity scent of Ginger. The persistent chill that had greeted her on that rainy October day was gone, banished by central heating and a different kind of warmth that seeped from the walls, from the photographs, from the small cat purring on her shelf. Sarah sipped her tea, her gaze drifting from Ginger to the framed photo on the dresser. Edith's kind eyes seemed to meet hers across the years, a gentle smile playing on her lips as her hand rested on a younger Ginger's back. Beside it, the wedding photo of Harold and Edie beamed with hopeful innocence. Our beginning. Sarah's eyes then traced the line of the patched wall, seamlessly integrated now, a testament to rupture and repair. Finally, her gaze rested on the archival sleeve propped nearby, containing Harold's precious blueprints. The lines showing the intentional voids, the ventilation, the notation, could provide interior highway for cat. The meaning of it all settled over her, not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet certainty of snow accumulating outside. This wasn't just her story, or Ginger's, or even Edith and Harold's. It was a story about the invisible threads that weave through places and creatures and time. It was about how love, true and deep, doesn't vanish, it transmutes. It embeds itself. Harold's love for Edith became lumber and plaster, designed corridors for her comfort and joy, embodied in a feline shadow. Edith's love for Ginger became a desperate, hidden message, a plea carried in a small cat's instinct and etched by frantic claws on a wall. Ginger's love for her lost human became a vigil, a stubborn persistence in the dark, and finally, a bridge to Sarah. And Sarah? Her journey into this house, steeped in her own loss and loneliness, had been an unwitting pilgrimage to become part of this continuum. She hadn't just adopted a cat, she had inherited a legacy. She had become the steward of Harold's thoughtful architecture, the keeper of Edith's final wish, the witness to Ginger's unwavering loyalty. Her love for Ginger wasn't just affection, it was an act of preservation. Repairing the wall was honoring the structure Harold built. Building the shelf was acknowledging Ginger's rightful place in the system he designed. Providing warmth and food and safety was fulfilling Edith's desperate hope whispered into the void. The message was clear, echoing in the purr, visible in the blueprints, tangible in the patched plaster. We are not alone in our love or our loss. Our stories intertwine in ways we can't foresee, echoing through time and space, carried in the most unexpected vessels, a paw tap on skin, a scratch on a wall, a line on a blueprint. Sanctuary isn't just found. Sometimes it's built, brick by loving brick, purr by resonant purr, across generations. And sometimes, home isn't a place you choose, but a legacy you accept, a story you agree to continue. Sarah thought about her own past. The slow erosion of her marriage. The guilt, the relief, the terrifying blankness of starting over. Arriving here, she'd felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Now, she felt grounded, woven into the very fabric of 17 Elm Street. Her sadness hadn't disappeared, it had simply found its place alongside Edith's grief and Harold's absence, integrated into the larger narrative of the house. It was a part of the structure now, like the patched wall, a testament to something broken and carefully mended, stronger for the repair. Ginger stretched on her shelf, extending one white-tipped paw, claws flexing delicately before retracting. She yawned, revealing a tiny pink tongue, then settled back, her purr deepening. Her green eyes, reflecting the soft lamplight, blinked slowly at Sarah. That slow blink. It still held its ancient watchfulness, but now layered with a profound, unshakable trust. It was the look of a creature utterly at peace in her domain, secure in the knowledge of her place, her history, and the human who now shared it. Sarah returned the blink. "I know, Ginger Snap," she whispered, the nickname Edith had used feeling natural now. "I know." She rose, her joints protesting slightly. It was time for Ginger's evening ritual, a small scoop of kibble, fresh water, and the ceremonial opening of the living room curtains so she could watch the snow-laden world outside before settling for the night. Ginger hopped down from her shelf as Sarah approached, weaving figure eights around her ankles, her tail a question mark in the air. As Sarah refreshed the water bowl, she glanced out the kitchen window. The snow was falling heavier now, thick, silent flakes painting the world anew. The old porch step Harold had built, the one Edith had warned about, wore a thick, pristine cap of white. Sarah made a mental note to salt it in the morning. A practical act of stewardship, of care, of belonging. Later, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, in her room, in the house that was truly hers now, in a way her old city apartment never had been. Ginger was already curled on the quilt at the foot, a warm, purring weight. The radiator hissed softly. The old house creaked and settled around them, familiar sounds now, like the house breathing. Comforting. Alive. Sarah picked up the small brass key from her nightstand. It gleamed dully in the low light. It had never opened the rosewood box. Doris had confirmed that. It had opened something far more valuable. It had been the first tangible proof Ginger offered, the key to unlocking not just a hidden message, but the entire soul of this place. It was a symbol of trust passed from Edith, through Ginger, to Sarah. A key to belonging. She placed it back down. She didn't need a physical key anymore. The house was open to her. Its history, its sorrows, its enduring love were woven into her days. They were in the purr resonating from the foot of the bed, in the warm gray patch on the living room wall, in the scent of fresh bread downstairs, in the blueprints safely stored, in the photograph of Edith's crinkled smile. Sarah switched off the lamp. The room was bathed in the soft, blue-gray light reflecting off the snow outside. Ginger's purr was the loudest sound, a steady, rhythmic thrumming that filled the darkness. It was the sound Harold Finley might have imagined when he sketched Cat Access. It was the sound Edith Finley had missed most of all. It was the sound of a small heart beating strong in the sanctuary built for it decades before she was born. It was the heartbeat of home. Sarah closed her eyes. The silence of the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the echoes of Harold's hammer, Edith's laughter, Ginger's months of silent waiting, and Sarah's own tentative steps towards belonging. It was full of the soft, relentless purr, a testament to resilience, to love that outlives individuals, to the unexpected ways we find our place, and the creatures who guide us there. The house held its breath no more. It hummed with life, past and present, a sanctuary built on love, purring in the dark. Can you feel it? That quiet hum, like Ginger's purr settling deep in your chest? Stories like this, they're more than words. They're shared heartbeats. Reminders that love leaves echoes, in walls, in paw prints, in the quiet courage of a hidden cat, and in the hearts of those willing to listen. If this journey with Sarah and Ginger touched you, if you felt that spark of connection, that bittersweet warmth, do me a kindness? Tap that subscribe button. It's the best way to make sure you're here for the next story waiting in the wings. The next hidden heartbeat, the next unexpected purr in the dark. Your thoughts? They matter. Deeply. Leave a comment below. Tell me, what moment resonated? Did Ginger's first paw tap find your heart? Did Harold's blueprint surprise you? Sharing your reflections, it keeps this community warm. It lets Sarah and Ginger know their story found its way home to you. Know someone who needs this? Someone facing their own empty house, their own hidden wall? Share this video. Pass on the warmth. The reminder that sanctuary and unexpected companionship can be found in the most broken places. You might just be the key that helps them unlock their own story. Want these stories delivered like a quiet friend knocking? Hit that bell icon. It means you'll get a gentle nudge, a whisper, whenever a new tale is ready. Stories of resilience, of small paws making big differences, of the extraordinary love hidden in ordinary lives, delivered right to you. Until the next story finds its voice, keep listening for the purr in your own walls. Keep your heart open to the unexpected guides. There's magic waiting just beneath the surface. Thank you, truly, for being here, for sharing this space, for keeping the stories alive.